Hello and welcome to Solopreneur, the show that helps business owners who are flying solo to solve their big sales, marketing and systems challenges one episode at a time. You can watch the video version of this episode at solopreneur.com. I'm Gareth Everson. Thanks for listening to the podcast. On today's episode, we're going to be completing the circle around our content planning, production and promotion. And on today's episode, we're going to be covering that last part of the jigsaw. How do we promote the content that we've created to our existing audience and to put it in front of potentially new viewers or listeners to our content? I use podcasting as my content mechanism. I explained why I do that on the last episode, but this episode applies under whatever mechanism that you're using to create your content, whether it's video content, blog content, or audio content. What I'm going to talk about today applies whichever method you're using. Just to recap, on episode 28, we talked about having a content plan for the year, an outline plan, and setting aside time to think about specific topics and create content on specific topics across the year so that there is a structure and a strategy around the content that you're creating for your audience. On episode 29, I covered the various different media that you can use to create that content. I talked about blogging, creating books, creating videos, and podcasting. And I explained why I chose podcasting for me. And then on episode 30, I talked you through that production process that I go through to plan and create each episode of my podcast up to the point where it's ready to hit publish to the networks. And that's where we pick up on this episode. So let's get into it. So when my podcast is ready, I've got two options when I want to publish that episode. I can either publish it straight away, and that goes out to the networks there and then, or I can schedule it to be published at a later date or time. I'll try to build up a bank of 2 or 3 episodes that are ready to go, just in case I've got things on one particular week and I don't get the opportunity to record, or I'm ill, or something else comes up. I try to have my podcast episodes ready for a Monday morning for people to listen to at the start of the week, which means that I will publish my episodes on a Sunday evening. And the reason that I do that is twofold. One, it means that I know that they're ready in case there's any sort of network disruptions or anything like that, or if one of the feeds doesn't fully complete. I know that there's some time between when I hit publish and when I want people to listen to it. Secondly, I finalize my email notification newsletter that's going to go out to my list on a Monday morning. I do that on a Sunday evening. And the links that I put in there are to the 2 main podcast networks that I'm publishing to, Apple Podcasts and Spotify Podcasts. And by publishing on the Sunday evening so that I've got those links to be able to include in the email newsletter, it just makes it easier for me to schedule that mailing for a Monday morning so I don't have to think about it. It has the links in there, so it makes it easy for anybody that's reading that email to click on those links and go and listen to that podcast. And it just makes things a little bit more seamless, a little bit easier to do it. So you've hit publish on the episode. And when I do that, what happens behind the scenes is that details of that episode go out to the various different podcast subscription platforms. The most common ones are Apple Podcasts and Spotify. But my feed also goes out to Pandora. It goes to a service called iHeartRadio, and it goes to a service called Deezer. I've had to register the podcast with all of those subscription services. So I have accounts on all of those, which you set up when you first start with your podcast host. When you hit publish on an episode, it's not the whole episode that goes out to those networks. It's a feed of information about a latest episode. Otherwise, there'd be huge amounts of data flying around the internet for episodes that aren't downloaded all of the time. If you're a subscriber to a podcast on whichever app you're using, Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever it happens to be, that app will be listening out for those new episodes that come out. And depending on your settings, it will either just let you know that there's a new podcast episode, or it will automatically download into the app for you so that you can listen to it when you're out and about on a walk or wherever, even if you don't have an internet connection. Apple and Spotify are by far and away the biggest networks when it comes to getting your podcast out there. So if you're choosing a podcast host, whether it's Alitu or somebody else, Libsyn, I also mentioned, it's really important that those two big ones are ones that you can publish to. The tool that I use to record my podcast into, Riverside, also records a video version of the podcast. And I use that version along with the captions that it's able to generate once I've edited the transcript. I use that version to upload into YouTube. Point to note on that, and this is something that tripped me up, perhaps because I've created videos before, I overthought the process around creating the video version of my podcast. And at times I've got caught up in not publishing as consistently as I do the audio version, the video version onto YouTube. I wouldn't overthink, if I were you, the video version that goes onto YouTube. I get it on there because it's great for SEO. It's great to include in the blog article that you then create off the back of it. It gives people, if they'd rather watch the video versions, a channel to be able to watch that in. Don't get tangled up in thinking that you have to have a completely edited version of the video version to upload to YouTube. If somebody wants to watch you on YouTube, they'll watch you. Maybe just have the video intro and the video outro before you upload it into YouTube. But even if you don't do that, I wouldn't overthink it. Just get it published onto YouTube and learn from my mistakes about not getting caught up in creating significantly edited videos before you upload onto the YouTube platform. Okay, so that's where the podcast goes to. What do I then do, and what's the sequence of activities that I do to then promote that content to my various different networks? There's a variety of different ways that I do it. I mentioned about how on a Monday morning, I'll have an email announcement going to my main email subscriber list from my email marketing software. That goes out first thing on a Monday morning. So that's the first way that my listeners, my subscribers, will get notified that there's a new episode that's come out. The second part that we need to think about is then, okay, that's great. Email has gone out. It's had a link to the various different networks. What about sharing that on social media as well? I don't want to bombard people who follow me on socials or on my emails. So what I'll generally do is I'll create a social media post, a couple of them across the course of the week. If the email's gone out on a Monday, I'll then schedule the social media post to go out on the Tuesday and the Thursday. And I'll do two different ones. And the format that I've used for those until now has been some text and a video snippet of that recording. Riverside, the software that I use, has what they call a magic clips capability, where it will interpret what's in your content, probably using the transcript from there, and work out what would make good little video snippets of it seems to be between about 25 and 40 seconds in length. I think there's work to be done on their magic clips capability at the time that I record this. For me, it generally takes a lot of editing on the sides to include or exclude different parts of what they automatically include in magic clips. The process that I found better than that was to take the text transcript download from the podcast and upload that, first of all, into ChatGPT I was using, and I was just simply asking ChatGPT to interpret what was in that transcript and give me what it thought were the top 4 or 5 subsections of that transcript that I could then create video shorts from. I've more recently moved over to Claude AI because at the moment it seems like their processing engine is a little bit more natural in terms of how it processes information. So whether you're using ChatGPT or Claude AI or one of the other AI tools, having a transcript from your content, whether it's video or blog or audio content, and uploading it into there and asking it to provide what it thinks are the most meaningful snippets that you can then use in social media posts is a really nice little shortcut. Instead of you listening back or watching back or reading back a lot of content that you then have to interpret how you'll then use that on social media. So I get that little feedback from the GPT that tells me which it thinks are the best 4 or 5 snippets that I could create videos from. And all I then simply do is go back into Riverside and I'll create a copy of the first recording and I'll just go and simply do a search for the first line of that snippet that's come back from the GPT. It has a text selector where I can select that entire snippet and then I can tell it to exclude everything else that's in that recording apart from that one snippet. And that's an awesome process because I'm in effect using like a text editor, like I was in Microsoft Word or a Google Doc, to tell the recording software, this is the part that I want for my short snippet. So I might have a 35-second or 40-second piece of content that is in the window, and I can then add really simply an icon to that video that says it's come from the Solopreneur Show, so that anybody that's watching that video can see that little icon in the top left of the screen. There's also a 2-3 step process to adding the captions to that is going to pull from the transcript. I tailor those captions to include one of my brand colors, so it's kind of consistent with the brand. I don't need to do that, but it just looks better when I do. And then I tell it to export it. And that whole process from creating the recommended snippets on Claude AI or ChatGPT to creating that little snippet video that's ready for social media takes no more than 3 or 4 minutes to do per post, which is a fantastic use of my time. Their export process to export it to 1080p, which is a good quality HD format. I don't export those social media snippets in 4K resolution, which is the same one that I use for the full version, but I export the 1080 HD version down into a video, and that takes them to process maybe 3-4 minutes, and I get an email notification when that's ready. I do that in 2 different formats. I do it in a 9:16 video format, the longer sort of portrait format for videos. And that format allows me to post to Instagram Reels. It allows me to post to my Facebook page and also YouTube video shorts. So that's the 9:16 format. And then I also do it as a 1:1 square video format. And that format is the one that's favored by LinkedIn. So I've got 2 different versions of that video that are ready to go there. All of that process, bearing in mind what I talked about on episode 28 in terms of the time that it should take you to create social media posts, all of that process takes at most maybe 10 minutes. And I'll also then use whichever AI engine I'm using, ChatGPT or Claude AI, to create for me a 150 to 300 word social media post that can go with that, derived from the transcript that I've uploaded to it. And that might need some tweaking, but I've given it my tone of voice to create content in my tone of voice, and it builds up an understanding of the kind of language that you use, the words that you don't want it to use, the level of excitement, if you like, in terms of what you're posting. So mine posts in a very sort of British way, relatively understated, but meaningful and insightful type format posts. So I've got my video and I've got my text part of what that social media post is going to look like. Remember, I'm going to do 2 social media posts across the week. So for those social media networks, I could log in to Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, my Facebook page to do the posting of that content manually in there, perhaps even the scheduling of it using the individual apps. But instead of that, and you won't be surprised to hear that I've got a scheduling solution around that, I run an agency that has an all-in-one CRM application that runs on a white label platform called Go High Level. It has in there a little component called the Social Planner, and it allows you to connect up something like 8 to 10 social media apps that you can then schedule content to or post immediately content to from that social planner. It saves me logging into all of those different apps. uploading my videos, uploading my content to those, it allows me to plan that out and to schedule those to go out on, as I say, a Tuesday and a Thursday. And those little video snippets that I'm creating that do that around different topics that I've covered on that podcast episode, they go out to those networks scheduled in advance, and I just get a notification of when they have gone live. I like scheduling those posts to go out to my network for a couple of reasons. One, I don't then have to think about it during the week to plan those out, especially if I've got other things on, if I've got client work or other content that I'm working on, other things in my business that I'm working on. It allows me to not even think about that. Secondly, it gives me some good basic metrics for engagement. So as I look back over time, I can see which video snippets or which content, which social media posts got the most engagement. That's really good. And it also just frees me up to, instead of thinking about just posting and leaving that social network to get on with my stuff, if I know what the schedule is for when that's going live, I can be on those channels when they have gone live to interact with anybody that's on there, anybody that likes it or comments on it specifically. LinkedIn especially really likes you to do that, really likes you to be around when you've posted. Some of the other networks, or their algorithms, seem a little bit less fussy about that, but LinkedIn feels like one of those networks where there's almost sort of an expectation that you're there to engage, not just to spray and pray, the term that I think people use. Spray your content and then just leave, and then just hope that somebody's going to engage with it. So what I'll tend to do is be online on LinkedIn, especially when my posts go live. Okay, so that's email and social posting around promoting your content that you're creating and sharing, that people will engage with, or lurkers on social media will see that you're posting consistently and regularly. And perhaps if you've engaged with them without them commenting or liking it, will go and check out your content over time. And if they like it, they'll subscribe to it. And if you're creating video or if you're creating podcast content, what you will see if your content's engaging with people is a gradual increase in the number of listens or views over time. One thing that people say is don't have an expectation that content will go viral. That happens in such a tiny percentage of businesses where you're producing content. It's a gradual increase in take-up. Existing subscribers will continue to listen. You'll lose some, but you'll pick up new subscribers over time. And especially with podcasting, what I've seen is that my earlier episodes still get lots of downloads, and that builds up and through. I can almost see when there are waves of people who've discovered the podcast, maybe listened to an episode, and then have gone back to the beginning and, if not binge listen, then put themselves almost like on a catch-up path to catch up with that content. And that's fantastic to see. And as I mentioned on a prior episode, what I love about podcasting is that those people that have listened to a number of different episodes or binge listened to it are far better conversations when it comes to having sales discussions or strategy discussions with those people. They really get the meaning of why they're there on the call and how you can help them. I'm so grateful for this process, for that, because it's really helped me to do that in a way that I've never really hit a groove with before when I've been doing other things. This next part of the content promotion, I stumbled on it almost purely by chance. So I launched the podcast in January. I was at a marketing conference in June this year, and there was a speaker there who talked about various different methods that you can use on LinkedIn to get more traction, in effect. And one of the methods that she talked about was having LinkedIn newsletters. I'd always dismissed LinkedIn newsletters thinking it was a poor alternative to having an email list and an email newsletter. But actually, it's probably a misnomer. A LinkedIn newsletter is what LinkedIn considers a LinkedIn article, which is almost like a blog post or a content post on their platform. But if you publish it in a newsletter format, those people who are on the network who subscribe to it will get notifications in the app, but also if they've got their settings set on to have email notifications for that particular topic, they'll also get email notifications out to them. Your content is hosted on the platform, almost like in this blog or article format, but LinkedIn newsletters will notify subscribers who are on there that you've got new content. And just before I come on to how I then use LinkedIn newsletters, I will just say this extra thing. A LinkedIn newsletter is not a replacement for an email newsletter. It's probably not a replacement for an online blog. It's just another way of finding more of an audience on that as a platform. Any new connections get invited to subscribe to your newsletter. When you start the newsletter, any existing connections that you have also get a notification of an invitation to subscribe to it. And all it is really is just another means to notify those people that you've got some content that's gone live. I mentioned that I almost stumbled on it by chance. So 6 months after starting the podcast, having picked up on the fact that LinkedIn newsletters were a nice alternative for different content to your email, to your blog content, it felt natural to me to start my LinkedIn newsletter journey with content that I'd created earlier in that process. So my LinkedIn newsletters, keep it different to my regular email, to my regular blog content, I started from the very beginning of first podcast episodes that I created LinkedIn newsletters for them, which has actually worked in this really nice dovetailed way. It's repurposing content that I've created before, but in a fresh and in a new format for LinkedIn. So that's worked out really well because I'm able to then to have 2 pieces of content that are going live to an audience every week, but I'm only creating 1 piece of content each week. I'm not having to burden myself with creating 2 very different pieces. I've just got 1 content stream that's on almost like a fast lane, the podcast and the blog that then goes with it and the email that goes with it, etc. And then I've got 6 months later, I've got the LinkedIn newsletter also going live, but on a 6-month delay. That then allows me to be able to talk about that in my email newsletter as well. So if we think about it, we've got podcast networks that are using my content. We've got YouTube that's using my content. We've got my email list that's hearing about new podcasts that are going live. We've got a blog version that appears on my website that is just simply the YouTube video, the podcast embed, some takeaway versions of that content that I've been helped by various different AI prompts to be able to create. They're probably 70% created by AI prompts that I have in that blog post. So those are going live as well. I've got the social media posts that are going. And then more recently, adding LinkedIn newsletters into the mix to cover content that I'd created 6 months before. That's also falling into the mix and allowing me to be able to then share an announcement that the LinkedIn newsletter's live with my email list. And because there's this naturally formed 6-month delay between the two, it's not like I'm talking about exactly the same stuff time and time again. So that's another nice way of being able to promote the content that you've created before and repurpose it, reuse it for another means. Some small final tips about how you can promote the content that you're creating, whether it's podcasting like I'm doing, or creating video content or blog content. Make sure that on your website, in the header menu, or at least in a prominent menu elsewhere, that you're featuring a link to the content that you're creating. If it's the podcast feed, include it in there. If it's video stuff, make sure you're including a link to that. Kind of goes without saying. Instead of linking to external sites for that, I make sure that it's linking to my own blog version of that content that I'm creating. So that's appearing on the website menu. I've also added a link to that content on the footer of my emails that are going out. So somebody that hasn't yet discovered my main content medium can see that if they become an email subscriber of mine, if they've downloaded a lead magnet or something like that. And then finally, as you start to build up a body of content, in order for you to stay on top of it, but in order for those who discover you for the first time to get, if you like, the best bits, the greatest hits of what you've created before. Also start to think about creating digest versions of some of those best episodes or best content. You can include that as a blog post. You can do it as an email series. That works really well for people that are coming into your world for the first time to build up an understanding of what you're about and how you do it. Those are all really good ways of being able to signpost great content that you've created before to new subscribers. So you'll see we've got a mix of promotion vehicles that you own and that you are managing where you can share that message. By owned, I mean things like your own email and your email list and your podcast platform. There are also different means that you can promote that content on platforms that aren't yours. And that's primarily social media or YouTube, places like that where somebody else owns the platform, but you can share content in a relevant way with your audience. The final mechanism is what I class under paid media. So for my very best content and my most accessible single episode type content, I also will occasionally advertise those as Facebook ads or as LinkedIn ads. The format I use for Facebook is that I will show content that I've created in the podcast, usually video snippets or content that I've posted to Facebook to those people that have visited a different site of mine. So my main website, I will remarket to those people with episodes that they might be interested in via a Facebook ad. I will very occasionally, if I want to promote a lead magnet or something along those lines that's been associated with a podcast, I will occasionally allow Facebook to go out and find people that would be interested in that content to go and download that lead magnet. Those work really well with relatively limited budget. On the LinkedIn advertising, this is something that I work with Rob Drummond on, who's also my first listener on the podcast. He's helped me to shape a LinkedIn advertising campaign, and we use the LinkedIn Conversations ad format to be able to do that. LinkedIn Conversation ads are basically messages that go to target people's inboxes based on a profile, based on their interest, based on their job titles, etc. It will go as a promoted email message to them in their LinkedIn inbox. And if they want to download, say, a guide that's associated with a podcast, they leave their details, that automatically fires through into my CRM so that I can follow up with them and send them that guide. Or as an alternative, they can click on a link that goes through to, in this instance, a podcast episode. So various different ways that you can then scale that message using relatively low cost ad networks. When I'm promoting on Facebook, I very rarely spend more than probably £5 a day on there to promote content. On LinkedIn, they've got, as I record this, a minimum spend of £8 per day. So if you do want to promote content a little bit further, then you're able to organically in your social media networks or your email marketing. Those are two good routes to use that way. I saved this episode topic until last for a couple of reasons, really. One, it logically fits after you've done the creation of it, but also it doesn't. Sometimes you've got to think about, what do you want people to do? What do you want them to experience? What do you want them to learn about before you then work your way back to that planner? If you're thinking about using a podcast as a vehicle to get more awareness and attention and leads into your business, think about the messages that will connect with that audience as you think about your plan for creating content. Second reason for talking about it as the last episode in this mini-series is that actually promotion takes at least as much time and effort as the creation of it. As I mentioned to you on the last episode, my podcast creation process is about an hour to create the episode and then 2, 3, 4 hours to edit the episode afterwards. I probably spend at least that on promoting that content outside of the recording. So over the course of the week, I'm probably spending 10 to 12 hours per podcast episode, which if you think about it, is when they're usually sort of half hour in length, That's quite a significant chunk of effort to be able to do it. The flip side of that is that it gives me a consistency and it gives me a medium to use every week to be able to get behind and talk about the topic that I'd planned in at the start of the year and then reviewed again every quarter. So I hope this content series has given you great food for thought. If you want to get the free guide that goes with this series, just simply go to solopreneur.com/content-plan and you can get the downloadable single page format that talks you through and gives you a structure around creating that annual, quarterly, monthly, and weekly content plan and helps you to shape that in your own business. As always, if you've got questions about any of these topics or you want to bounce ideas around, if you go to askgareth.com, that will take you to my LinkedIn profile where my DMs are open and we can have an interaction on there. And I'd be delighted to help answer any questions that you've got around adding consistent content marketing into your business plan for the next year. Thanks for listening to the episode. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. And if you valued the content, be sure to leave a nice testimonial on whatever platform you're listening to this on. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Solopreneur Podcast. Remember that what we learned today builds more value if there's a plan to take action on it tomorrow. So head to solopreneur.com and check out our growing community of action takers and all the training and software that you need to build a scalable business without breaking the bank. And if you value the show, please help others to discover it too by leaving us a review wherever you get your podcasts or by sharing a link to an episode on LinkedIn or wherever your finger does its scrolling.